What if I told you that the most important decision in WNBA history wasn't made on the basketball court? It wasn't announced at a press conference. It wasn't even discussed publicly. It happened in corporate boardrooms, behind closed doors, where executives were looking at spreadsheets instead of highlight reels. And when those numbers started telling a story, an entire generation of veteran players realized something absolutely terrifying. The league they had built, the league they had sacrificed for, the league they had promoted when nobody else cared, no longer revolved around them. This wasn't about basketball talent. This wasn't about championships or Olympic medals. This was about something far more powerful in modern sports: money, attention, and the cold mathematics of revenue generation. Here's what this video is really about. We're going to expose how one player's arrival triggered a complete economic transformation that forced the WNBA to make an impossible choice between honoring its past and betting everything on its future. You're about to see how ticket sales, television contracts, endorsement deals, and labor negotiations all collided in a way that redefined power in women's professional sports. We'll show you the exact moments when executives stopped asking, "How do we grow the league together?" and started asking, "How much do we really need everyone?" This isn't a story about one athlete being great. This is a story about an entire business model being rewritten in real time, and why the veterans who carried this league through its darkest years are now watching from the sidelines as corporations and networks decide their fate. Let's break down exactly how this happened, piece by piece, dollar by dollar. Before we dive deeper, let me ask you something. When was the last time you saw a professional sports league go from half-empty arenas to sold-out venues literally overnight? Because that's exactly what happened here. And the speed of this transformation is what made executives start questioning everything they thought they knew about their own product. The Indiana Fever, a franchise that had been struggling for years to put a few thousand people in seats, suddenly had waiting lists stretching for blocks. Season ticket sales didn't just increase, they tripled in a single week. We're talking about upper decks that hadn't been opened in years suddenly being filled with screaming fans. Road games became a problem, but not the kind of problem teams usually worry about. Small market arenas couldn't handle the demand. Games had to be relocated to bigger venues because fire marshals were turning people away at the door. And here's the part that should make your jaw drop. This was all happening before she had even played a single professional game. This wasn't about proven performance at the WNBA level. This was pure anticipation, pure magnetism, pure commercial power. Now, you need to understand what this meant for the people running the league. For 25 years, the WNBA had operated on hope and patience. Owners absorbed financial losses year after year, believing that eventually, gradually, the audience would grow. Veterans showed up and promoted the game when sponsors barely noticed, and networks treated their games like afterthoughts. But when those ticket numbers started rolling in, when spreadsheets showed revenue projections that had never existed before, something fundamental shifted in those boardrooms. Executives weren't looking at gradual growth anymore. They were looking at exponential expansion, and exponential expansion has a source. They could trace it, they could measure it, they could see exactly where the surge was coming from. And once you can identify this specific catalyst for millions of dollars in new revenue, everything about how you value your assets changes. If you're enjoying this breakdown of how money really moves in professional sports, do me a favor right now. Hit that like button, drop a comment telling me what you think about this situation, and subscribe, because we're about to go even deeper into the numbers that changed everything. Let's talk about television numbers, because this is where things went from impressive to absolutely unprecedented. Her professional debut didn't just beat expectations, it shattered every viewership record the WNBA had seen in years. We're talking millions of viewers tuning in for a single game. Numbers that made network executives literally stop and recheck their data because they couldn't believe what they were seeing. Streaming subscriptions jumped. Social media engagement went through the roof. But here's what made this different from every other moment of increased attention the league had experienced before. It wasn't a one-time spike. It was consistent, measurable, and predictable. Networks have sophisticated minute-by-minute tracking systems, and those systems showed something that changed the entire conversation. When she was on the court, ratings climbed. When she sat on the bench, viewership dropped. When she had the ball, engagement spiked. The data was so clear, so undeniable, that it became impossible to argue with. Fans weren't watching the WNBA as a league anymore. They were watching one specific player. And that distinction mattered more than anyone wanted to admit publicly. For decades, the WNBA had positioned itself as a collective movement. The messaging was always about unity, about sisterhood, about lifting everyone together. But data doesn't care about branding, philosophy, or feel-good narratives. Data only answers one brutal question: what drives engagement? And every single metric, from television ratings to streaming retention to social media analytics, kept pointing to the same answer. Jersey sales told an even more shocking story. Within days of her first game, merchandise bearing her name wasn't just leading the pack. It was outselling established veterans by margins that stunned even the most optimistic marketers. Reports suggested that her single-day jersey sales rivaled what other players accumulated across entire seasons. Sponsors noticed. Broadcasters noticed. And you better believe team owners noticed. Because for the first time in league history, the WNBA wasn't operating as a charity case being propped up by the NBA's financial support. They had something real, something tangible, something they could actually build a sustainable business around. Hope turned into projections. Projections turned into strategy. And strategy, in the cold reality of professional sports business, doesn't revolve around sentiment or loyalty. It revolves around one thing: whoever generates the revenue controls the future. Now, here's where the human element collides with the business reality, and it's not pretty. The first signs of tension weren't loud or obvious. They started with subtle comments in podcasts, veterans casually mentioning that rookies need to earn their place, little reminders that the professional game is different from college basketball. On the surface, this sounds completely normal. Every sports league has veterans who haze rookies and remind them to stay humble. But something felt different this time, and fans could sense it immediately. The tone had an edge. There was an undercurrent of frustration that went beyond typical rookie initiation. See, established stars were being asked about this one player constantly. Every interview, every media panel, every pregame show somehow circled back to her impact on the league. For players who had carried the WNBA through years of empty arenas and minimal coverage, it felt like being erased in real time. Their accomplishments, their championships, their Olympic gold medals, all of it suddenly felt invisible because the media spotlight had shifted so dramatically and so quickly to someone who hadn't proven anything at the professional level yet. Then the game started, and the physicality went to another level entirely. Hard screens that looked intentional, shoulder checks that seemed designed to send a message, flagrant contact that didn't appear accidental when you watched the replays. One particular incident went absolutely viral, spreading far beyond basketball circles into mainstream news. The hit was so obvious, so blatant, that even casual viewers who had never watched a WNBA game in their lives were talking about it. And they weren't debating defensive strategy or competitive intensity. They were asking one simple, damning question: why does it look like they're trying to hurt her? That question changed everything, because perception drives narrative, and narrative drives business. From that moment forward, this wasn't just about basketball competition anymore. It became a story, a drama, a conflict that people couldn't stop watching. Veterans thought they were defending the league's competitive integrity and reminding everyone that professional respect must be earned. What they didn't realize was that every public challenge, every hard foul, every sarcastic comment was actually reinforcing her centrality to the entire league. Every time someone tried to diminish her impact, they pushed her name back into the headlines. Every time someone knocked her down and she calmly got back up without retaliating, the contrast became more powerful. And executives watching all of this unfold in real time understood something that the players didn't. Controversy can be damaging, but it can also be incredibly profitable when it drives engagement through the roof. While fans were arguing on social media and players were exchanging subtle jabs through interviews, something far more significant was happening in corporate conference rooms. In February 2025, NBC announced a massive new media rights deal that involved both the NBA and the WNBA. And the numbers were absolutely staggering. We're talking billions of dollars tied to long-term broadcast strategy, streaming expansion through Peacock, digital distribution, and cross-platform promotion that would fundamentally reshape how these leagues operated. For the WNBA, this should have been a purely celebratory moment. After decades of fighting for consistent network commitment, of being scheduled in terrible time slots, of feeling like an afterthought in sports broadcasting, they finally had a major network willing to invest serious money. But here's where the story takes a turn that nobody saw coming. NBC didn't build their WNBA rollout around the established champions, the decorated veterans, the Olympic gold medalists, or the multiple championship winners. Instead, they centered their entire promotional campaign around one player. She wasn't just featured prominently, she was positioned as the face of the league, placed alongside NBA legends, seated courtside at marquee events, brought into crossover segments where she analyzed NBA games with household names. That decision sent a message so clear that even the most optimistic veterans couldn't ignore it anymore. NBC didn't have to make that choice. They had options. They could have balanced their coverage, rotated the spotlight among multiple stars, honored the league's legacy while promoting new growth. But when they tested promotional materials internally, when they ran the analytics that billion-dollar corporations always run before launching major campaigns, the results weren't even close. Posters featuring established veterans generated modest engagement. Clips featuring the rookie generated explosive response. Social media advertisements with her image reportedly multiplied interaction metrics several times over. Click-through rates jumped, shares increased dramatically. And most importantly, casual viewers, the exact audience that networks desperately need to justify these massive investments, recognized her instantly. Recognition is currency in modern media, and NBC had just invested billions of dollars. This wasn't about fairness or respect or honoring those who built the foundation. This was about return on investment, pure and simple. Inside corporate offices, emotion doesn't factor into multi-million-dollar strategy decisions. Data does. And the data was screaming one message. When she appeared on screen, audiences stayed. When she didn't, viewership dropped. NBC had internalized that reality. And once they did, the marketing machine adjusted to match it. The league's collective branding model, built carefully over decades around shared visibility and equality, suddenly didn't align with modern engagement metrics anymore. Now let's follow the money, because that's where this transformation becomes impossible to deny. Brands don't argue about legacy. They don't debate who built the foundation or who deserves recognition. They care about one thing: conversion. And in 2025, every conversion metric in women's basketball was pointing in the same direction with laser precision. For years, endorsement money in the WNBA had been steady but limited. A few top players secured shoe deals with major brands. Some landed insurance, commercials, or partnerships with lifestyle companies. It was respectable income, but it wasn't transformative wealth. Then this player entered the equation, and corporate tracking systems absolutely lit up. Every social media post she made generated massive interaction rates. Every highlight clip translated directly into merchandise clicks. Every televised appearance carried measurable spikes in online traffic that analytics teams could track in real time. Brands monitored these things obsessively, constantly measuring engagement rates, click-through percentages, audience demographics, and retention curves. And when her name appeared in their data, patterns emerged so quickly and so clearly that marketing executives couldn't ignore them, even if they wanted to. She wasn't just popular among existing WNBA fans. She was scalable, meaning her appeal extended beyond the core audience into new markets, new demographics, and crossover sports audiences that had never engaged with women's basketball before. Nike found itself in a delicate position because they had long-standing relationships with established veterans and had invested in women's basketball well before this surge in attention. Loyalty matters in long-term brand strategy. But brand strategy also responds ruthlessly to momentum. Reports suggested that pre-orders for her signature shoe were hitting demand levels rarely seen in women's basketball history. Other companies didn't hesitate at all. Insurance brands, sports drink manufacturers, equipment companies, they all leaned in hard because the mathematics were simple and undeniable. When she appeared in an advertising campaign, engagement multiplied. When veterans appeared, engagement stabilized but didn't spike. And in the modern attention economy, spikes matter more than stability. Peacock streaming subscriptions reportedly rose noticeably during games she played in. Social media trending cycles aligned perfectly with her game schedule. Corporate America saw something incredibly rare: a female athlete generating genuine crossover interest at massive scale. That's not just valuable in sports marketing, it's strategic gold. But this corporate alignment had real consequences for everyone else. Endorsement budgets are finite. When more money flows dramatically toward one personality, less money remains available for others. Veterans who had enjoyed steady brand relationships for years began noticing shifts. Campaign renewals slowed down. New contract offers felt smaller. Marketing emphasis adjusted away from them. This wasn't personal, and it wasn't vindictive. It was simple resource allocation. And corporations are absolutely ruthless when it comes to allocating limited resources toward maximum return. Here's where the story moves from uncomfortable to genuinely consequential. Because what happened next didn't just affect individual careers or endorsement deals. It fundamentally altered the balance of power in labor negotiations, and that shift could reshape the league for the next decade. For years, the WNBA Players Association had been preparing for this exact moment. They wanted higher salaries, better travel conditions, increased revenue sharing, and long-term contract guarantees. These weren't radical demands compared to other professional sports leagues. They were modest, reasonable requests for basic improvements. And historically, the players had leverage in these negotiations because the fundamental rule of labor relations is simple. Without the players, there is no league. That's how collective bargaining works. The threat of a strike or work stoppage has always been labor's strongest weapon because owners can't generate revenue without the product on the court. But something had changed quietly behind the scenes, and that change rewrote the entire negotiation playbook. Before this player entered the league, the WNBA had reportedly operated at a financial loss for most of its existence. The NBA subsidized operations year after year. Owners absorbed financial hits, hoping for gradual growth that might eventually lead to profitability. The business model was fragile, and everyone in those negotiation rooms knew it. Then the revenue numbers shifted dramatically. Ticket sales surged, sponsorship interest climbed, broadcast partners committed long-term money, merchandise revenue spiked, streaming subscriptions saw noticeable bumps during specific games. And for the first time in league history, profitability didn't feel hypothetical anymore. It felt achievable, maybe even inevitable. But here's the part that changed everything. Owners could trace the source of that revenue surge with precision. It wasn't evenly distributed across the roster. It wasn't shared equally by all legacy players. It was concentrated overwhelmingly around certain games, certain matchups, certain appearances. When the union pushed for larger revenue sharing percentages, owners did what owners always do. They ran the numbers. And those numbers told a story that weakened labor's traditional leverage. Games featuring this specific player consistently outperformed those without her by substantial margins. Viewership dropped sharply when she wasn't playing. Merchandise revenue centered heavily around her name and image. This created an uncomfortable new reality that nobody wanted to say out loud. If a strike occurred, if veterans walked out demanding higher pay, would audiences completely disappear? That question used to have a simple, obvious answer. Yes, absolutely. But now the answer had become, not necessarily. Because if fans were tuning in primarily for one or two rising stars, rather than for the established veterans, the product didn't vanish entirely without the old guard. That possibility, even just the theoretical existence of that possibility, weakened the union's strongest negotiating weapon. And once ownership gains confidence that they might survive a work stoppage, once they believe the audience could remain partially engaged through emerging talent, compromise becomes slower, harder, and far more calculated than it's ever been before. By early 2025, something had fundamentally shifted in how ownership was thinking about the league's future. And you could feel it in the way they carried themselves during negotiations. For years, financial reports around the WNBA had carried this tone of cautious optimism mixed with genuine concern. Investment required patience. Growth was incremental. Sustainability depended on careful balance and support from the NBA. But now, suddenly, projections looked aggressive, optimistic, even bold in ways they never had before. And when that kind of confidence enters ownership meetings, when executives stop operating from a position of fear and start operating from a position of strength, long-term planning shifts in dramatic ways. Quietly, behind closed doors where the media couldn't see and players couldn't hear, contingency models were reportedly being explored. Questions were being asked that would have been unthinkable just 2 years earlier. What would a youth-centered league actually look like? What if marketing fully embraced the next generation instead of trying to balance old and new? What if salary structures were recalibrated around measurable market impact rather than tenure and championships? What if the league leaned all the way into star-driven economics instead of continuing to resist it? None of this was officially confirmed through press releases or public statements, but speculation grew among insiders because the incentives had clearly changed. The draft pipeline was stronger than it had ever been in league history. College basketball was producing players with massive built-in followings before they ever signed a professional contract. The NIL era meant that rookies were arriving already monetizable, already familiar with brand partnerships, already comfortable with social media engagement. That fundamentally changes risk assessment for ownership. Historically, if a veteran star retired or left the league, Viewership would dip significantly and take years to recover. But if rookies were entering with millions of followers and national name recognition already established, that dip could potentially be offset much more quickly. That possibility made ownership less dependent on tenure and experience, and dependence is what determines leverage in any negotiation. Some veterans reportedly began sensing this shift in subtle ways. The urgency that ownership used to have around keeping established stars happy seemed to fade slightly. Conversations that once felt collaborative started feeling more transactional. The tone changed from "we need you" to "we value you." And anyone who's ever been in a negotiation knows that distinction matters enormously, because for decades, experience had equaled stability in the WNBA. Veteran players were the foundation that kept the league credible and competitive. But now, youth was starting to equal upside, and upside attracts investment in ways that stability never can. The whispers weren't about immediately replacing anyone or blowing up rosters. They were about flexibility, about options, about having contingency plans that didn't exist before. And once ownership has options, once they genuinely believe they can survive, and maybe even thrive through transition, the power dynamic shifts irreversibly. Now we need to talk about the elephant in the room that everyone's been carefully avoiding. Because while executives were celebrating revenue growth and networks were committing billions of dollars, there's a fundamental risk that comes with building an entire league's economic model around a single personality. There's a reason most professional sports leagues actively avoid this kind of concentrated dependency. It's not because they don't love superstars or don't want to promote individual talent. It's because dependency at this scale is inherently fragile, dangerously fragile. And right now, whether anyone wants to admit it publicly or not, the WNBA has walked directly into that exact risk. For the first time in the league's history, growth curves are heavily concentrated around one player. Broadcast schedules are shaped around her matchups. Marketing campaigns revolve around her highlights. Streaming platforms measure success based on her minutes played. Sponsors calculate their return on investment using her social media engagement metrics. That level of centralization can absolutely generate explosive short-term growth, the kind of numbers that make investors excited and networks willing to write massive checks. But long-term, it creates a vulnerability that keeps executives awake at night. What happens if she gets hurt? We've already seen moments where an awkward landing or a slight limp sends panic rippling across social media instantaneously. Every replay gets frozen and analyzed frame by frame. Every slow motion angle gets dissected by amateur doctors in comment sections. And this panic isn't just because fans care about her well-being, though they certainly do. It's because the league's entire financial projection now hinges on her availability and continued performance. That's pressure unlike anything any player in WNBA history has ever carried, especially this early in a career. It's not just about basketball performance anymore. It's about narrative continuity. As long as she plays, the story moves forward. As long as the story moves forward, ratings remain elevated. As long as ratings remain elevated, sponsorships stay committed and networks stay invested. But break that chain, even temporarily through injury or burnout or just needing a break, and the ripple effect would be immediate and severe. Viewership would drop, engagement would fall, sponsors would start questioning their commitments. This is the gamble that ownership consciously accepted when they chose acceleration over insulation, when they chose growth spikes over balanced stability, because returning to the old model, the slower expansion with distributed spotlight, didn't offer the same financial breakthrough potential. But centralized growth means centralized vulnerability. If this player ever decided to take a break, play overseas exclusively, step away from the intensity, or shift focus toward broader media ventures outside basketball, the league would feel it immediately in ways that would panic investors. Because the brand equity has now stretched beyond the WNBA itself. She's appearing in NBA conversations, mainstream sports analysis shows, national commercial campaigns. Her identity and her value are no longer confined to one league, which strengthens her individual leverage enormously, but simultaneously weakens the structural balance that keeps leagues stable over decades. Step back from all the drama, the fouls, the interviews, the social media arguments, and look at the actual pattern of what just happened here. A league that operated for 25 years on gradual growth and patient investment suddenly experienced a surge so dramatic, so concentrated, that it forced immediate structural change. Not cosmetic adjustments or minor tweaks to marketing strategy, but foundational transformation in how the entire business operates. And it all centers around one uncomfortable truth that modern sports has been wrestling with across every league and every level. Sports isn't built on participation anymore. It's built on attention. Attention is the currency. Whoever controls attention controls leverage, controls negotiations, controls the future. For years, the WNBA fought desperately for visibility. Players advocated for coverage. They demanded primetime slots and better marketing budgets. They showed up and promoted when nobody was watching. Now, visibility isn't the problem at all. Distribution is, because the attention didn't spread evenly across the league like everyone hoped it would. It concentrated dramatically around one source, and that concentration forced evolution faster than anyone expected or frankly wanted. Young players watching this transformation unfold right now are learning something absolutely critical about how modern professional sports actually works. Talent gets you drafted, but marketability builds empires. The next generation won't just train on basketball courts. They'll train their social media presence, build their personal brands before ever signing a contract, arrive in the league already monetized and ready to convert audiences immediately. What we're witnessing here isn't just internal conflict in one league. This is a preview of how professional sports will operate moving forward in a digital-first, attention economy world. The veterans represent an era where resilience and consistency sustain leagues through difficult years. This new wave represents an era where virality and engagement metrics accelerate growth at speeds previous generations couldn't imagine. Neither approach is inherently wrong, but they operate under completely different economic realities that don't easily coexist. The veterans build stability when nobody else believed. The new generation is building scale because technology finally allows it. The real question isn't who deserved the spotlight more, or who worked harder, or who sacrificed more. The real question is whether the WNBA can successfully merge both eras, honor the foundation while embracing transformation, without fracturing so badly that it damages the entire ecosystem. Because cultural tension like this doesn't vanish overnight just because business is booming. Fans have chosen sides, players feel the division, and business momentum rarely waits for everyone to feel comfortable before it moves forward. If this works, if the league manages this transition carefully by cultivating multiple stars, balancing exposure, and maintaining competitive integrity, it could reach levels of profitability that seemed impossible just 3 years ago. If it fails, if they lean too heavily into one personality while alienating foundational supporters, the volatility could undo years of progress. But here's what's certain: the era of slow, patient, incremental growth is over. The WNBA is in the spotlight now, whether it's comfortable there or not, and spotlights expose everything. If this deep dive into how money, power, and leverage actually work in professional sports resonated with you, I need you to do something right now. Smash that like button because it tells the algorithm to push this analysis to more people who need to understand what's really happening behind the headlines. Drop a comment below telling me your honest take on this situation, whether you think this transformation will ultimately help or hurt the league long term. And subscribe to this channel because we're not stopping here. We break down the business moves, the power shifts, and the decisions happening in rooms where cameras aren't allowed. The surface story is never the real story, and this transformation we just analyzed is only the beginning of something much bigger in women's professional sports.